At 07:15 on September 20th, 1944, Major Charles Carpenter settled into the cockpit of his L-4 Grasshopper at a Ford airstrip near Arracourt, France. He watched fog roll across the runway, a shroud thick enough to hide German Panther tanks advancing just 3 miles away. His stats: 31 years old, 400 flight hours as an artillery spotter, 0 tanks destroyed. The Germans had just launched a counterattack with the 5th Panzer Army. 47 Panther tanks, 30 armored cars. The 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A was pinned down. Carpenter's job was simple: fly over enemy positions, call in artillery coordinates, and watch other men fight. The L-4 Grasshopper was the military version of the Piper J-3 Cub, fabric-covered wings, 85-mile-per-hour top speed, 2 seats, no armor, and no guns. German soldiers called them Maytag measure because the 40-horsepower Continental engine sounded like a washing machine. American artillery spotters flew 500 missions per month over France. German troops rarely shot at them. Killing an unarmed spotter plane would reveal your position to every Allied gun within 10 miles. It was a gentleman's agreement that kept pilots alive. But Carpenter had watched that agreement break men. 3 weeks earlier, his 4th Armored Division had lost 41 Sherman tanks in 6 days near Luneville, 32 crews killed. German Panthers could spot Shermans from 2,200 yards. By the time American tank commanders saw the enemy, Panther guns were already firing. Their 75mm shells punched through Sherman frontal armor at 800 yards. Most crews never made it out. Carpenter flew over the burning tanks every day. He counted the bodies, called in the coordinates, and watched smoke rise from hatches that would never open again. His radio crackled with desperate voices calling for artillery support that always arrived too late. He could see German armor maneuvering, could track their positions, but could do absolutely nothing except report and watch American soldiers die. 3 months of that had changed something in Carpenter. 2 days earlier, he'd cornered an ordnance technician and a crew chief at the airstrip. He asked them a question that made both men stare at him like he'd lost his mind. Could they mount M1 bazookas on his Grasshopper's wing struts? Wire the firing mechanisms into his cockpit? Turn a fabric-covered observation plane into something that could fight back? The technician had laughed, then stopped laughing when he realized Carpenter was serious. If you want to see how Carpenter's unauthorized modification turned an artillery spotter into America's only airborne tank ace, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Carpenter. By dawn, 6 bazooka tubes jutted from his wing struts like metal fangs. Each was loaded with a 2.36-inch rocket. Each rocket packed enough explosive power to punch through 3 inches of armor plate. Carpenter had painted Rosie the Rocketer on the fuselage in white letters. The fog was lifting. Through the dissipating gray, Carpenter could see shapes moving toward Combat Command A Panther tanks, and he had 6 rockets with their names on them. The idea had come to Carpenter 3 weeks earlier, during the siege of Luneville. He'd been flying reconnaissance over German positions when he spotted a column of Wehrmacht trucks moving supplies to the front. A perfect artillery target. Carpenter radioed the coordinates. He waited. By the time American guns found the range, the trucks had vanished into the forest. He'd watched the shells land on an empty road. That night in the officer's tent, Carpenter met 2 other L-4 pilots, Lieutenant Harley Merrick and Lieutenant Roy Carson. They'd been drinking and talking about a crazy idea. What if they mounted weapons on their Cubs? Not for defense, but for attack. Carson had already tried it. He'd strapped 2 M1 bazookas to his wing struts and destroyed 2 German supply trucks near Metz. Command hadn't officially approved it, but they hadn't stopped it either. Patton's Third Army was moving too fast to wait for official paperwork. Carpenter found an ordnance technician named Sergeant William Morrison the next morning. Morrison was a farm kid from Iowa who could fix anything with wire and determination. They worked on the modification for 2 days. The technical challenge was weight. The L-4 Grasshopper had a maximum cargo capacity of 232 pounds. A single M1 bazooka weighed 13 pounds. 6 bazookas meant 78 pounds. Add the mounting brackets, the electrical wiring, and the firing switches. They were pushing the aircraft's limits before they even loaded the rockets. Each bazooka had to be angled slightly upward, 15 degrees. This gave Carpenter a fighting chance during shallow dives. The rockets wouldn't drop straight down. They'd arc toward the target while Carpenter pulled up and away from return fire. Morrison wired the firing mechanisms to a panel he installed just left of Carpenter's seat. 6 toggle switches, 1 for each rocket. Flip a switch. A battery sent an electrical charge through copper wire to the bazooka's igniter. The rocket's propellant caught fire. 2 pounds of thrust pushed the projectile down the tube at 280 feet per second. The warhead was the M6 high-explosive anti-tank round, 6.5 inches long, 3.4 pounds. The shaped charge used the Monroe effect. Upon impact, a copper lining collapsed inward, forming a superheated jet. The temperature reached 3,000 degrees, hot enough to punch through steel like butter. But there were problems. German Panther tanks had frontal armor 8 inches thick. The M6 rocket could barely scratch it. Side armor was 3 inches, still difficult. But the top of a Panther's turret, the engine deck, 40 millimeters, just 1.6 inches. The rocket could penetrate that. This meant Carpenter had to attack from above, dive at German tanks, fire his rockets, and pull up before German machine guns shredded his fabric-covered wings. Morrison had done the math. At 80 miles in a dive, Carpenter would have maybe 3 seconds to line up his shot, 3 seconds to fire, and 3 seconds to pull up before slamming into the ground or flying into a wall of German bullets. The Grasshopper had no armor. 1 machine gun round through the engine would send Carpenter into an uncontrolled crash. 1 bullet through the fuel tank would turn the aircraft into a fireball. Morrison finished the last wiring connection, stepped back, and looked at Carpenter. "You sure about this?" Carpenter thought about the 32 tank crews that died at Luneville, about the voices on his radio calling for help that never came. Carpenter pushed the throttle forward. The Grasshopper lifted off the runway. The fog was gone. And directly ahead, 5 Panther tanks rolled toward Combat Command A. Time to see if this worked. Carpenter spotted the first Panther at 100 yards. The tank was moving northeast along a tree line, turret rotating, searching for American positions. Behind it, 4 more Panthers. Between them, half a dozen armored cars. The entire German column stretched maybe 800 yards. Carpenter's hands were shaking. He'd never fired a weapon from an aircraft before, never attacked anything more dangerous than a supply truck. Now he was diving at 5 tanks that could kill him with a single burst from their machine guns. The Grasshopper descended through 800 feet, 700, 600. At 500 feet, the Germans saw him. A Panther's hull-mounted machine gun opened fire. Tracer rounds arced up like angry fireflies. Carpenter heard fabric tear. He felt the aircraft shudder. A round had punched through his left wing, missed the strut by inches. 400 feet. The lead Panther filled his vision. Carpenter could see the commander standing in the open hatch. He could see the man pointing at him, shouting orders. Carpenter flipped the first toggle switch. Nothing happened. He flipped it again. Still nothing. The electrical connection had failed, or the battery was dead, or Morrison had crossed a wire somewhere. 300 feet. The Panther's turret was turning toward him. That 75-millimeter gun could swat him from the sky like a fly. Carpenter flipped the second switch. The bazooka fired. The rocket screamed from its tube, leaving a white smoke trail. The Grasshopper lurched sideways from the recoil. Carpenter fought the controls. He watched the rocket arc down. It struck the Panther's engine deck dead center. The explosion sent metal fragments spinning through the air. Black smoke poured from the tank's engine compartment. The Panther lurched to a stop. The commander dropped inside the turret. Hatches slammed shut. 1 tank immobilized. 5 rockets left. Carpenter yanked the stick back, climbing. The Grasshopper groaned under the G-forces. More machine gun fire followed him up. Rounds whipped past his cockpit. One bullet shattered his instrument panel. Glass and metal sprayed across his lap. He was at 800 feet when he banked hard left. The remaining Panthers had scattered. German commanders had realized this wasn't just an observation plane. This thing had teeth. Carpenter circled, looking for his next target. An armored car was racing toward a stone farmhouse, trying to find cover. Carpenter pushed the nose down, entering his second dive. 600 feet, 500, 400. He fired the third rocket. Direct hit. The armored car erupted in flames. Ammunition inside started cooking off. Secondary explosions tore the vehicle apart. Carpenter had two problems now. First, he'd fired two rockets. That meant his Grasshopper was now asymmetrical. The right wing was heavier than the left. The aircraft wanted to roll starboard. He had to fight the controls to keep it level. Second, every German on the ground knew he was hostile. A Panther's main gun fired. The shell passed so close, Carpenter felt the pressure wave. His ears rang. The Grasshopper bucked like a horse. For a second, he thought he'd been hit, but the controls still responded. The engine still ran. He fired his fourth rocket at 300 feet. Missed. The projectile slammed into the ground 20 yards from a Panther. Dirt and shrapnel peppered the tank's side armor. No penetration. Carpenter had two rockets left, and he was out of altitude. He pulled up, leveling off at 1,000 feet. His fuel gauge showed half empty. He'd been in the air 20 minutes. It felt like 20 hours. Then he saw them down below. Combat Command A's trapped support units, water trucks, supply vehicles. 40 men, pinned behind a low ridge. German Panthers were advancing on their position. In 5 minutes, those men would be dead or captured. Carpenter turned south, pushed the throttle to maximum. The Grasshopper screamed back toward the airstrip at 90 Mafour. He needed more rockets. He was going back for a second run. Carpenter landed hard at the forward airstrip. The Grasshopper bounced twice, skidding to a stop. Morrison was already running toward him with a crew of ordnance handlers. "How many?" "2 confirmed," Carpenter shouted over the engine noise. "Maybe 3. Need to reload now." Morrison's crew went to work. They had practiced this. 6 men, 6 rockets, 2 minutes. Each bazooka had to be reloaded from the rear. One man held the tube steady. Another slid the rocket in, secured the electrical connection, and moved to the next launcher. Carpenter didn't shut down the engine. He didn't climb out. He just sat in the cockpit watching the clock. Every second mattered. Those trapped support units at Arracourt were still pinned down. 1 minute, 40 seconds. Morrison gave the thumbs up. Carpenter released the brakes. The Grasshopper rolled forward, lifted off. He was back over Arracourt 12 minutes after his first attack. The situation had changed. The immobilized Panther from his first run was still smoking, but the other tanks had regrouped. They'd formed a defensive perimeter around the trapped American support crews. German infantry had dismounted from their armored cars and were moving forward through a wheat field. Carpenter came in from the east, sun behind him. The Panthers didn't see him until he was at 600 feet. He fired 2 rockets in quick succession. The first missed, striking the ground between 2 armored cars. The second hit Incendies KFZ'd 251 half-track dead center. The vehicle's fuel tank exploded. Burning gasoline spread across the wheat field. German infantry scattered. The trapped American waterpoint crews saw their chance, started their trucks, broke cover, and drove hard for friendly lines while Carpenter made another pass. His last 2 rockets both hit. One struck a Panther's turret ring, jamming the traverse mechanism. The tank could still move but couldn't aim its gun. The other hit an armored car, disabling it. Carpenter climbed to 2,500 feet. Circled. The German attack had stalled. The Panthers were withdrawing, pulling back toward their own lines. The American support crews had escaped. Carpenter returned to the airstrip, landed, shut down the engine, and sat in the cockpit for 5 minutes. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Morrison approached carefully. "You okay?" Carpenter nodded. "Reload." That afternoon, Carpenter flew a third sortie, found a German supply column near Nancy, and destroyed 2 more trucks. When he landed, there were 15 people waiting at the airstrip. Word had spread. Pilots, ground crews, even a Stars and Stripes correspondent named Wes Gallagher, who'd heard about the crazy Major attacking tanks in a Piper Cub. By evening, Major General John Wood, commander of the 4th Armored Division, arrived at the airstrip. He wanted to see this bazooka-equipped Grasshopper himself. He wanted to meet the pilot who just saved 40 men and stopped a German counterattack. Wood asked one question. Can other pilots do this? Carpenter said yes, if they're willing to fly low and get shot at. Within a week, 3 more L-4 pilots had bazookas mounted on their aircraft: Lieutenant Ralph Whittle, Captain James Parker, and Lieutenant George Wilson. None of them achieved Carpenter's success rate, but they proved the concept worked. The German High Command issued new orders on September 25th. All American liaison aircraft were now priority targets. Cubs with weapons mounted on wing struts were to be shot down on sight. The gentleman's agreement was over, and Carpenter had just painted a target on every L-4 Grasshopper in France. October 3rd, 1944. A German flak gunner near Metz watched an American L-4 Grasshopper approach at 800 feet. Standard observation plane. Harmless. The gunner tracked it through his sights but held fire. Revealing his position would bring American artillery down on his head within minutes. Then he saw the tubes under the wings. The gunner opened fire. 20mm shells tore through the air. The Grasshopper banked hard, escaped, but the message had been sent. The Luftwaffe intelligence office at Nancy received a report that evening. American liaison aircraft were now armed. Consider all Cubs hostile. German tank commanders started carrying new standing orders. Engage American observation aircraft on sight. Use machine guns. Use main guns if necessary. Do not let them get close. Carpenter noticed the change immediately. Before October, German troops ignored his Grasshopper. Now, every machine gun in range opened fire the moment they saw him. Flak batteries that used to hold their positions now tracked him across the sky. Panzer commanders rotated their turrets toward him instead of toward ground targets. On October 5th, a Panther fired its main gun at Carpenter from 900 yards. The shell missed by 30 feet, but the Germans were learning. They'd figured out that a 75mm high-explosive shell didn't need a direct hit to destroy a fabric-covered aircraft. The blast wave alone could tear it apart. Carpenter adapted. He started flying lower, 50 feet above the ground, using tree lines for cover, approaching targets from unexpected angles. The Germans expected attacks from above. Carpenter started coming in from the sides, from behind ridges. Once, he flew down a river valley and popped up behind a German supply depot before anyone saw him coming. He also upgraded his weapons. The M1 bazooka had been adequate against light armor, but German tanks were getting heavier. The new Panther G had improved turret armor. The Tiger II was arriving at the front with armor the M1 rocket couldn't touch. Morrison found a solution: the M9 bazooka, an improved version. Same weight as the M1, but it fired the M6A3 heat rocket. It could penetrate 3.9 inches of armor at 30 degrees. More importantly, it was more reliable. The M1's electrical firing system failed 15% of the time. The M9 rarely malfunctioned. Carpenter's ground crew removed his 6 M1 launchers and installed 6 M9s. The new rockets weighed slightly more. Morrison had to recalculate the weight distribution, adding ballast to the tail to keep the aircraft balanced. The modification took 6 hours. By October 10th, Rosie the Rocketer was back in action. Carpenter destroyed 3 German trucks that day, an armored car on the 11th. On October 13th, he caught a Panther with its hatches open, its crew standing outside smoking. They didn't hear the Grasshopper until it was 200 yards away. Carpenter fired from 100 feet. The rocket hit the engine deck. The tank erupted in flames. That kill brought his official total to 4 tanks destroyed. Unofficially, crew chiefs and ground observers claimed he'd hit at least 8, some damaged but still mobile, others abandoned by their crews. The Germans started calling him der verrückte Major, the Mad Major. Radio intercepts picked up warnings. When Panzer commanders spotted an L-4 with underwing weapons, they radioed alerts to nearby units. The small plane with rockets. Avoid if possible. Shoot down if not. Carpenter told the Stars and Stripes reporter, "The word must be getting around. Every time I show up now, they shoot with everything they have. They never used to bother Cubs. Bazookas must be bothering them a bit." Then on October 18th, 4th Armored Division Intelligence received reports of a major German buildup near Arracourt, 40 tanks, maybe 50. The Wehrmacht was preparing a counteroffensive to retake Nancy, and Carpenter was going to be right in the middle of it. October 19, 1944, 05:30 hours. The 4th Armored Division received orders to advance on Chateau Salins. Intelligence reported German armor concentrating along the Saale River. 43 Panther tanks, 17 Tiger IIs, dozens of armored cars and half-tracks, the largest German formation Patton's Third Army had faced in 6 weeks. General Wood called Carpenter to division headquarters at 0615. "I need to know what's waiting for us out there. Roads, bridges, tank positions." Wood paused. "And if you see targets of opportunity..." Carpenter understood. He wasn't being sent just to observe. He was being sent to attack. At 0700, Carpenter lifted off. 2 other bazooka-equipped grasshoppers followed. Lieutenant Ralph Whitell flying 300 yards to his left. Captain James Parker another 300 yards beyond that. 3 Cubs, 18 rockets total, against 60 German armored vehicles. They found the enemy at 0740. German tanks were dug into defensive positions along a ridgeline 2 miles east of Chateau Salins. Hull-down positions, only turrets visible. Perfect defensive terrain. An American frontal assault would be suicide, but the Germans had made one mistake. They'd positioned their tanks to face west, watching for American ground forces. They weren't watching the sky. Carpenter circled north, came around behind the ridge, and approached from the east with the morning sun at his back. The Germans never saw him until he was at 400 feet, directly above their position. He fired all 6 rockets in 15 seconds. 3 hit, 2 Panthers, and a Tiger II. The rockets penetrated the thin top armor. 1 Panther caught fire immediately. The Tiger's engine was disabled. The 3rd tank's turret traverse jammed. Whitell and Parker followed Carpenter down. 18 more rockets, 12 hits total between the 3 aircraft. By the time they climbed away, 7 German tanks were burning or immobilized. Another 4 had taken damage. The German formation broke defensive positions. They started withdrawing east toward Morhange, exactly what Wood needed. The defensive line had crumbled before American ground forces even made contact. Carpenter landed at 0830, rearmed, and was back in the air by 0900. His second sortie found a German supply column. 14 trucks carrying fuel and ammunition for the tanks at Chateau Salins. Carpenter destroyed 4 trucks. He set off a chain reaction of explosions that consumed the entire column. 200,000 gallons of fuel. Gone. Third sortie. At 11:30, a German mobile artillery battery was shelling American positions near Vic-sur-Seille. Carpenter spotted the self-propelled guns from 2 miles away, attacked from the north, and destroyed 2 Westby artillery vehicles. The rest scattered into the forest. By 1500 hours, Carpenter had flown 6 combat sorties and fired 36 rockets. The official count: 4 tanks destroyed, 2 damaged. 6 armored vehicles destroyed, 4 artillery pieces destroyed, 1 supply column eliminated. The 4th Armored Division took Chateau Salins with minimal casualties that afternoon. The German defensive line had collapsed, not because of overwhelming American firepower, but because a history teacher from Illinois kept diving out of the sky in a fabric-covered airplane and blowing up their tanks. That evening, a colonel from 3rd Army headquarters arrived at Carpenter's airstrip. He carried orders signed by General Patton himself. The brass wanted to talk about expanding the bazooka program. They wanted Carpenter to train other pilots. They wanted to turn his one-man experiment into standard operating procedure for every liaison aircraft in the European theater. Carpenter had just changed the way America fought the war, and he didn't even know it yet. The media found Carpenter before the Army did. On October 22nd, Wes Gallagher from the Associated Press published the first story. Major fights Nazi tanks in Cub armed with bazookas. The New York Sun picked it up, then Liberty Magazine, Popular Science. By mid-October, newspapers across America were running features about the history teacher from Illinois who was attacking German tanks in a Piper Cub. The Pentagon had a problem. Technically, Carpenter's modification was unauthorized. No regulation permitted mounting bazookas on liaison aircraft. No field manual described the tactics. No training program existed. Carpenter had essentially invented a new form of combat without asking permission. But the results were impossible to ignore. By October 30th, 4th Armored Division records credited bazooka-equipped L-4s with 14 German tanks destroyed or disabled, 27 armored vehicles, 18 supply trucks, and 3 artillery positions, all for 0 American aircraft losses. 3rd Army Headquarters issued Technical Bulletin 44-3 on November 6th, employment of bazookas on L-4T type aircraft. The document outlined mounting procedures, firing techniques, and tactical doctrine. Everything Carpenter and Morrison had figured out through trial and error was now official Army policy. 9 more L-4 squadrons received approval to mount bazookas. Not all pilots wanted them. Flying into German machine gun fire in an unarmored aircraft required a particular kind of courage, or insanity. The line between the two wasn't always clear, but enough pilots volunteered. By December, 47 bazooka-equipped Grasshoppers were operating across France. They formed what 3rd Army called tactical harassment units, not powerful enough to replace fighter bombers, but perfect for hitting targets of opportunity. Supply convoys, artillery positions, tanks that strayed from their formations. The Germans adapted. They started mounting extra machine guns on their tanks specifically to engage aircraft and positioned flak batteries along likely approach routes. Some Panzer units assigned 1 tank in each platoon as dedicated anti-aircraft defense. It didn't matter. The Cubs were too small, too maneuverable, too unexpected. German gunners trained to track Thunderbolts at 300 base or map couldn't adjust to targets moving 85 mph. By the time they acquired a Grasshopper in their sights, it had already fired and vanished behind terrain. On December 14th, Major General Wood recommended Carpenter for the Silver Star. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against the enemy." Wood added a personal note. This officer, his innovative tactics saved American lives and demonstrated exceptional courage under fire. Carpenter received the medal on January 3, 1945. By then, his official count stood at 6 German tanks destroyed, 2 Tigers, 4 Panthers, making him America's only airborne tank ace. Witness accounts claim the real number was higher, maybe 14 tanks, maybe more. Battle damage assessment was difficult when you were attacking from 800 feet and pulling up through machine gun fire. But Carpenter never cared about the count. He cared about the men who made it home, because a German tank wasn't there to kill them. In March 1945, Carpenter started feeling sick. Exhaustion, night sweats, weight loss. The flight surgeon ordered him back to a field hospital. The diagnosis came 3 weeks later and changed everything. Hodgkin's disease, cancer of the lymphatic system. The doctors at the field hospital gave Carpenter 2 years to live, maybe less. The disease was aggressive. Treatment options in 1945 were limited. Radiation therapy, experimental drugs, nothing with good odds. Carpenter received an honorable discharge in April 1946. The Army promoted him to lieutenant colonel, gave him his medals, and sent him home to Illinois. He walked into Urbana High School in September 1946 and asked for his old teaching job back. The principal stared at him. "You're supposed to be dying." Carpenter said he'd rather die teaching than sitting at home waiting. He taught American history for 20 years. He never talked much about the war. When students asked about the Silver Star on his classroom wall, he changed the subject. Talk about the Constitution, the Civil War, anything except himself. His daughter Carol later said he believed other men deserved recognition more. The tank crews who fought on the ground, the infantry who took the hills. He'd just been an observer who happened to carry rockets. But the pilots remembered. When Carpenter died on March 22, 1966, 47 former Army aviators attended his funeral. Men who'd flown Cubs with bazookas in France, Germany, and Italy. Every one of them credited Carpenter with proving it could be done. His L-4 Grasshopper survived the war. The Army left it in Europe as surplus. An Austrian pilot bought it, painted it yellow, and flew it for years, never knowing its history. He eventually donated it to a museum in Graz, where it sat forgotten in storage. In 2017, researchers at the American Heritage Museum identified the aircraft, serial number 4330426, Rosie the Rocketer. They traced its history, verified the records, and brought it back to the United States. The restoration took 3 years. Workers stripped decades of paint, found bullet holes in the wings patched with fabric, and discovered the original mounting brackets where Morrison had welded the bazooka tubes. Every scar told the story. Today, Rosie the Rocketer hangs in the American Heritage Museum in Hudson, Massachusetts, suspended in mid-attack behind a German Panther tank. 6 replica bazooka tubes are mounted on the wing struts. Visitors can stand beneath it. Look up at the fabric-covered wings. Try to imagine flying that thing into combat. The museum placard lists the facts. 6 tanks destroyed, 47 combat sorties, 0 times shot down. America's only airborne tank ace. But numbers don't capture what Carpenter really accomplished. He saw men dying, he saw a problem no one else had solved. And instead of accepting it, he grabbed some bazookas and a can-do attitude and invented a solution that changed modern warfare. The Army's current doctrine for attack helicopters traces its roots directly to Carpenter's tactics. Low-altitude strikes, standoff weapons, hit-and-run engagements. Every Apache pilot flying today owes something to a history teacher who wouldn't accept that observation planes had to be defenseless. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots and teachers and mechanics who saved lives with courage and 6 bazookas. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Charles Carpenter doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered.